Close your eyes if you'd like. Get comfortable. Tonight, we're traveling back to 1948, to a beach in Australia, to one of the most mysterious cases in true crime history. On December 1, 1948, a man's body was found on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was wearing a suit, lying against a wall, perfectly still. At first, people thought he was sleeping. But he wasn't. He was dead, and nobody knew who he was. His clothing labels had been removed. He carried no identification. No one came forward to claim him. And despite one of the most extensive investigations in Australian history, his identity remained a mystery for 74 years. In his pocket, investigators found a tiny scrap of paper with 2 Persian words printed on it, Tamám Shud. It means, it is finished, or, it is ended. The paper had been torn from the final page of a book of Persian poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. When police found the book months later, they discovered something even more mysterious, a secret code written on the back cover. A code that has never been solved. For decades, people wondered, was he a spy? A jilted lover? A smuggler? Why did he die? And most importantly, who was he? In 2022, after 74 years, DNA testing finally revealed his identity. His name was Carl Charles Webb, a 43-year-old electrical engineer from Melbourne. But even though we now know his name, many mysteries remain. Why did he come to Somerton Beach? How did he die? What did the code mean? Tonight, we're going to walk through this entire fascinating case, from the discovery of his body to the DNA breakthrough that finally solved one of history's greatest mysteries. So settle in, relax. Let's begin this journey into one of true crime's most captivating unsolved mysteries. November 30th, 1948. Somerton Beach, Adelaide, South Australia. It's early evening. The sun is setting over the ocean. Several couples are walking along the beach, enjoying the warm Australian summer weather. And that's when they notice him. A man, dressed in a full suit and tie, slumped against the seawall. His head is resting against the wall. His legs are extended straight out in front of him. His feet are crossed. One arm is lying on the sand beside him. One couple notices him around 7 p.m. They think he's drunk. His position looks awkward, unnatural. But they don't approach him. It's not unusual to see someone sleeping off a big night at the beach. Another couple sees him around the same time. They also assume he's sleeping or drunk. The man's hand moves slightly, they think. Or maybe it's just the wind. No one disturbs him, and as night falls, he remains there, motionless. The next morning, December 1st, 1948, one of the witnesses from the previous evening, a man named John Lyons, returns to the beach. He's surprised to see the man still there, in the exact same position. Lyons approaches. He speaks to the man. No response. He touches him. The body is cold. Lyons immediately alerts police. When authorities arrive, they examine the body. The man appears to be in his early to mid-40s. He's about 5 feet 11 inches tall, with ginger brown hair, fair skin, and hazel eyes. He's wearing a brown knitted pullover, a white shirt, a red, white, and blue striped tie, brown trousers, socks, polished shoes. He's dressed nicely, well groomed. His suit is clean and pressed. This is not someone living on the streets. This is someone who cared about his appearance. But when police search his pockets, they find something strange. His pockets contain an unused second-class railway ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket, a pack of juicy fruit chewing gum, some Wrigley's chewing gum, a box of Bryant and May matches, 2 combs, a pack of Army Club cigarettes. But no wallet, no identification, no money. Even stranger, every single label on his clothing has been removed. Not accidentally, deliberately cut out. The labels on his jacket, his shirt, his pants, all gone. Police also notice something peculiar about his clothing. Some items appear to be of American manufacture, which is unusual for Australia in 1948. They check his teeth, hoping dental records might help identify him. His teeth are in remarkably good condition, better than most Australians of that era. This suggests he had access to quality dental care. But there's no sign of what killed him. There's no blood, no obvious injuries, no signs of violence. His face is peaceful. He looks like he simply fell asleep and never woke up. A police pathologist, Dr. John Barclay Bennett, conducts an autopsy. And what he finds is both fascinating and frustrating. The man's stomach contains a pasty substance that appeared to be blood. His liver and spleen were enlarged. His heart showed signs of congestion. But Bennett can't determine a definitive cause of death. He tests for common poisons. Nothing. He tests for rare poisons. Nothing. There's no evidence of natural disease that would explain the death. Bennett's conclusion: the man likely died of heart failure, possibly induced by poison. But what poison? He can't say. One medical witness at the subsequent inquest would note that the man's pupils were unusually small, which could indicate certain types of poisoning. But without a confirmed poison, it remains speculation. So police have a well-dressed dead man. No identification, no obvious cause of death, and all his clothing labels removed. The investigation begins. Police immediately launch a public appeal. They take photographs of the man's face and distribute them to newspapers across Australia. They take his fingerprints and check them against every database available, not just in Australia, but internationally. Nothing. No matches. They check missing persons reports. No one matching his description has been reported missing. They release detailed descriptions of his clothing to see if anyone recognizes where it might have been purchased. Several tailors and clothing manufacturers are contacted. Some items appear to be American-made, but this leads nowhere. Police also make a plaster cast of the man's face and upper torso, a death mask. This is preserved for future identification attempts. This death mask, decades later, would prove crucial to solving the case. Meanwhile, investigators notice something else unusual. The man's calves are particularly well developed, suggesting he walked or ran frequently. Some speculate he might have been a dancer or an athlete. His hands show no signs of manual labor. His fingernails are clean and well maintained. This is someone who worked indoors, in a professional capacity. But still, no one comes forward to identify him. Then, on January 12, 1949, 6 weeks after the body was found, police discover something they had missed. Hidden in a tiny fob pocket inside the man's trousers, a pocket so small it's almost invisible, they find a tightly rolled piece of paper. It's been torn from a book. And on it are 2 words, printed in a distinctive typeface, Tamám Shud. The words are Persian. They translate to, ended, or, finished. Police immediately begin searching for the origin of this scrap of paper. They contact literary experts, libraries, bookstores. And they discover that Tamám Shud are the final 2 words of a collection of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century Persian poem about mortality, fate, and the fleeting nature of life. These words appear on the very last page of the book. Someone had torn out the final page of a Rubaiyat and placed this tiny scrap of paper in the dead man's pocket. But why? Was it a message? A suicide note? A clue to his identity? Police launch a public appeal. If anyone has a copy of the Rubaiyat with the final page missing, please come forward. Months pass. Nothing. And then, in July 1949, 7 months after the body was discovered, a man walks into a police station. He's a local businessman, and he has an incredible story. He says that on November 30, 1948, the very day the Somerton Man was seen on the beach, someone threw a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam into the backseat of his car. His car had been parked near Somerton Beach with the windows rolled down. He'd found the book lying there but hadn't thought much of it. Books sometimes got lost. He'd set it aside, but when he heard about the police appeal, he checked the book. And sure enough, the final page had been torn out. Police examine the book, and what they find is extraordinary. On the back cover of the book, faintly visible, are pencil markings. Someone had written something, then apparently tried to erase it. But by using special lighting and photography techniques, police are able to make out what was written. There are 5 lines of text that appear to be some kind of code. Mr. Goababd MTBIMPANETPMLIABOAIQCITTMTSAMSTGAB. Below the code is a phone number. And below that, what appears to be another word or sequence of letters. Police trace the phone number. It belongs to a woman living in Glenelg, a suburb of Adelaide, just a few miles from Somerton Beach. Her name is Jessica Ellen Thompson, but she goes by Jeston. This is where the story takes an even more intriguing turn. When police contact Jessica Jeston Thompson, she's cooperative but guarded. She's a 27-year-old nurse. She's married to Prosper Thompson, and they have a young son together, a baby boy named Robin, who was born in July 1948, just months before the Somerton Man was found. Police show her the plaster death mask of the Somerton Man. Her reaction is dramatic. According to witnesses, she appears completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. She claims she doesn't know who the man is, but her reaction suggests otherwise. Police press her. How is her phone number in the dead man's book? Jeston explains that during World War II, she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat as a gift to a man named Alfred Boxall, an army lieutenant she'd known during the war. She'd written an inscription in the book, something romantic, personal. Could the dead man be Alfred Boxall? Police track down Boxall. He's alive and well, living in Sydney. And he still has the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jeston gave him years ago. So the dead man is not Boxall. But then how did Jeston's phone number end up in a different copy of the Rubaiyat? Jeston claims she has no idea. She insists she didn't know the Somerton Man. She never saw him before. But many people don't believe her. Her reaction to seeing the death mask was too intense, too emotional, to be coincidence. Over the years, theories have emerged about what really happened. Some people believe Jeston and the Somerton Man had a romantic relationship. Perhaps he was Robin's biological father, not Prosper Thompson. Perhaps he came to Adelaide to see her, to see the baby. Perhaps she rejected him, and he took his own life on the beach near her home. Others believe the Somerton Man was a spy, and that Jeston was somehow involved in espionage. Let's talk about the spy theories, because they dominated this case for decades. It's 1948. The Cold War is just beginning. Tensions between the Soviet Union and the West are escalating. Australia is strategically important. There are military installations, secret weapons programs. Could the Somerton Man have been a Soviet spy? An American spy? A double agent? Here's the evidence that fueled these theories. The labels removed from his clothing. This suggests he was trying to hide his identity, classic spy behavior. The code in the book. The 5 lines of seemingly random letters look like an encrypted message. Cryptographers have analyzed it for decades and never cracked it. The cause of death. The autopsy suggested poisoning, but no specific poison was identified. This could indicate a sophisticated poison used by intelligence agencies, something like digitalis or strophanthin, which can simulate heart failure. His physical condition, his well-developed calves, his excellent teeth, his professional grooming, all suggest someone with access to resources and training. His unusual ear structure. Photographs show that the Somerton Man's ears had a very rare characteristic. The upper hollow of his ear, the cimba, was larger than the lower hollow, the cavum. This occurs in only about 1 to 2% of the population. Could this have been noted in intelligence files? The location. Somerton Beach is near Glenelg, which at the time had military significance. But here's the problem with the spy theories, they're all speculation. There's no hard evidence, no intelligence documents, no witness testimony, no defector statements, nothing. Hidden in a tiny fob pocket inside the man's trousers, a pocket so small it's almost invisible, they find a tightly rolled piece of paper. It's been torn from a book, and on it are 2 words, printed in a distinctive typeface, Tamám Shud. The words are Persian. They translate to, ended, or finished. Police immediately begin searching for the origin of this scrap of paper. They contact literary experts, libraries, bookstores, and they discover that Tamám Shud are the final 2 words of a collection of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century Persian poem about mortality, fate, and the fleeting nature of life. These words appear on the very last page of the book. Someone had torn out the final page of a Rubaiyat and placed this tiny scrap of paper in the dead man's pocket. But why? Was it a message? A suicide note? A clue to his identity? Police launch a public appeal. If anyone has a copy of the Rubaiyat with the final page missing, please come forward. Months pass. Nothing. And then, in July 1949, 7 months after the body was discovered, a man walks into a police station. He's a local businessman, and he has an incredible story. He says that on November 30th, 1948, the very day the Somerton Man was seen on the beach, someone threw a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam into the backseat of his car. His car had been parked near Somerton Beach with the windows rolled down. He'd found the book lying there but hadn't thought much of it. Books sometimes got lost. He'd set it aside, but when he heard about the police appeal, he checked the book. And sure enough, the final page had been torn out. Police examine the book, and what they find is extraordinary. On the back cover of the book, faintly visible, are pencil markings. Someone had written something, then apparently tried to erase it. But by using special lighting and photography techniques, police are able to make out what was written. There are 5 lines of text that appear to be some kind of code. MRGOABABDMTBIMPANETPMLIABOAIQCITTMTSAMSTGAB. Below the code is a phone number. And below that, what appears to be another word or sequence of letters. Police trace the phone number. It belongs to a woman living in Glenelg, a suburb of Adelaide, just a few miles from Somerton Beach. Her name is Jessica Ellen Thompson, but she goes by Jestin. This is where the story takes an even more intriguing turn. When police contact Jessica, Jestin, Thompson, she's cooperative but guarded. She's a 27-year-old nurse. She's married to Prosper Thompson, and they have a young son together, a baby boy named Robin, who was born in July 1948, just months before the Somerton Man was found. Police show her the plaster death mask of the Somerton Man. Her reaction is dramatic. According to witnesses, she appears completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. She claims she doesn't know who the man is, but her reaction suggests otherwise. Police press her. How is her phone number in the dead man's book? Jestin explains that during World War II, she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat as a gift to a man named Alfred Boxall, an army lieutenant she'd known during the war. She'd written an inscription in the book, something romantic, personal. Could the dead man be Alfred Boxall? Police track down Boxall. He's alive and well, living in Sydney. And he still has the copy of the Rubaiyat that Jestin gave him years ago. So the dead man is not Boxall. But then how did Jestin's phone number end up in a different copy of the Rubaiyat? Jestin claims she has no idea. She insists she didn't know the Somerton Man. She never saw him before. But many people don't believe her. Her reaction to seeing the death mask was too intense, too emotional, to be coincidence. Over the years, theories have emerged about what really happened. Some people believe Jestin and the Somerton Man had a romantic relationship. Perhaps he was Robin's biological father, not Prosper Thompson. Perhaps he came to Adelaide to see her, to see the baby. Perhaps she rejected him, and he took his own life on the beach near her home. Others believe the Somerton Man was a spy, and that Jestin was somehow involved in espionage. Let's talk about the spy theories, because they dominated this case for decades. It's 1948. The Cold War is just beginning. Tensions between the Soviet Union and the West are escalating. Australia is strategically important. There are military installations, secret weapons programs. Could the Somerton Man have been a Soviet spy? An American spy? A double agent? Here's the evidence that fueled these theories. The labels removed from his clothing. This suggests he was trying to hide his identity, classic spy behavior. The code in the book. The 5 lines of seemingly random letters look like an encrypted message. Cryptographers have analyzed it for decades and never cracked it. The cause of death. The autopsy suggested poisoning, but no specific poison was identified. This could indicate a sophisticated poison used by intelligence agencies, something like digitalis or strophanthin, which can simulate heart failure. His physical condition. His well-developed calves, his excellent teeth, his professional grooming, all suggest someone with access to resources and training. His unusual ear structure. Photographs show that the Somerton Man's ears had a very rare characteristic. The upper hollow of his ear, the cimba, was larger than the lower hollow, the cavum. This occurs in only about 1 to 2% of the population. Could this have been noted in intelligence files? The location. Somerton Beach is near Glenelg, which at the time had military significance. But here's the problem with the spy theories, they're all speculation. There's no hard evidence, no intelligence documents, no witness testimony, no defector statements, nothing. And as we now know, the Somerton Man's real identity was far more mundane than anyone imagined. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's continue with what happened in the investigation. In June 1949, 6 months after the body was found, an inquest was held into the Somerton Man's death. The coroner heard testimony from police, medical experts, and witnesses. Dr. John Barclay Bennett, the pathologist, testified that in his opinion, the man had died from heart failure, possibly due to poisoning. But he couldn't identify the poison. Other medical witnesses agreed that the death was not natural. The coroner's jury returned an open finding. The man's identity was unknown, and the cause of death could not be definitively determined. The Somerton Man was buried on June 14, 1949, at West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide. Hundreds of people attended the funeral, curious onlookers, journalists, police officers. But no family members, no friends, no one who actually knew him. A collection was taken up to pay for a proper headstone. It simply reads, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach, the 1st of December 1948. And there the case remained, unsolved, for decades. But people never forgot about it. The Somerton Man became a fixture of Australian folklore. Books were written, documentaries were made, amateur detectives spent years trying to crack the code, trying to identify the man, trying to solve the mystery." Some of the more colorful theories included: he was a jilted lover who committed suicide. He was murdered by a jealous husband. He was a ballet dancer who had performed in Australia and stayed behind. He was a smuggler involved in illegal activities. He was an American sailor who had jumped ship. He was a time traveler. Yes, really, some people believed this. The code in the book was analyzed by military cryptographers, university mathematicians, code-breaking enthusiasts. Some claimed to have solved it. Others said it wasn't a code at all, just random letters. One popular theory was that it was a one-time pad, a type of encryption that's virtually unbreakable unless you have the key. But without knowing what system was used, or what the key was, the code remained impenetrable. In 1978, an engineer named Paul Lawson suggested the code might be the first letters of words from a poem or passage. He spent years trying every possible text he could think of. He never found a match. In 1994, John Harbour Phillips, the Chief Justice of Victoria, reviewed the case as part of a legal research project. He concluded that the Somerton Man likely died of poisoning by digitalis, a cardiac glycoside that can cause heart failure and was difficult to detect in 1948. But even this didn't solve the central mystery: who was he? Then, in the 2000s, something happened that would change everything. Derek Abbott, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Adelaide, became fascinated by the case. Abbott wasn't a detective. He wasn't a forensic scientist. He was an engineer who specialized in signal processing. But he was also an amateur sleuth with a passion for solving mysteries. In 2009, Abbott married Rachel Egan, the daughter of Prosper Thompson, Justin's husband. This meant Abbott was now connected, through marriage, to one of the key figures in the Somerton Man case. And Abbott became obsessed with solving it. He began by trying to extract DNA from the Somerton Man's remains. But this proved difficult. The body had been embalmed, which degraded the DNA. Samples taken from the bones and teeth yielded only partial DNA profiles, not enough for a definitive identification. But Abbott didn't give up. In 2011, he was granted access to the plaster death mask that had been made of the Somerton Man's face back in 1949. And embedded in that plaster, caught in the material when the mask was created, were several strands of hair. Hair contains DNA. And because this hair had been preserved in plaster for over 60 years, it was in better condition than the DNA from the embalmed body. Abbott and his team at the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA began working on extracting usable DNA from the hair. It took years. The DNA was degraded. The samples were tiny, but slowly, they made progress. By 2018, they had successfully extracted the complete mitochondrial DNA genome of the Somerton Man. This confirmed he was of European descent along his direct maternal line. Specifically, he belonged to haplogroup H4001A. a haplogroup possessed by only about 1% of Europeans. But mitochondrial DNA is only inherited through the maternal line. It could tell them about his maternal ancestry, but it couldn't identify him directly. They needed autosomal DNA, the DNA inherited from both parents, to build a family tree and identify him. And that's where forensic genealogy came in. Derek Abbott teamed up with Colleen Fitzpatrick, a renowned American forensic genealogist who specializes in using DNA to solve cold cases. Fitzpatrick had been involved in some of America's most high-profile cold case identifications. She was an expert in forensic genetic genealogy, the technique of using DNA databases and family trees to identify unknown individuals. Together, Abbott and Fitzpatrick worked to extract more DNA from the hair samples. By July 2022, they had enough autosomal DNA to create an SNP profile, a genetic profile that could be compared against databases of DNA samples uploaded by people researching their ancestry. They uploaded the Somerton Man's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where people can search for genetic relatives. And they got hits. Hundreds of distant relatives. Now came the painstaking work, building a family tree. Using the DNA matches, Abbott and Fitzpatrick began constructing a massive family tree, working backwards from the DNA matches to find common ancestors. They cross-referenced birth records, marriage certificates, death records, newspaper archives, immigration documents, anything that could help them build out the tree. The tree eventually included about 4,000 people. And as they built it out, a pattern emerged. The DNA matches triangulated to a specific family lineage, the Webb family of Victoria, Australia. One name kept appearing: Carl Charles Webb. Born November 16, 1905, in Footscray, Melbourne. Son of Richard August Webb and Eliza Amelia Morris Grace. Abbott and Fitzpatrick began researching Carl Webb. They found he was an electrical engineer and instrument maker. In October 1941, he married Dorothy Jean Robertson, a 21-year-old foot specialist. Webb was 35 at the time. The last documented mention of Webb in the public record was April 1947, when he left his wife Dorothy. In October 1951, Dorothy filed for divorce on the grounds of desertion. By that time, she had moved from Melbourne to Butte, South Australia, a town just 89 miles northeast of Adelaide. The pieces fit. Webb disappeared from the public record in April 1947. The Somerton Man was found in December 1948 in Adelaide, not far from where Webb's estranged wife was living. Webb was an engineer, which matched the Somerton Man's well-groomed hands and professional appearance. Webb's age matched. Born in 1905, he would have been 43 in 1948, consistent with the estimated age of the Somerton Man. To confirm the identification, Abbott and Fitzpatrick needed to verify the DNA match with living relatives of Carl Webb. They traced Webb's family tree and found descendants of his siblings. These descendants agreed to provide DNA samples. The DNA matched. On both the maternal and paternal sides. Carl Charles Webb was the Somerton Man. On July 26, 2022, 74 years after the body was found on Somerton Beach, Derek Abbott and Colleen Fitzpatrick announced their findings to the world. The Somerton Man had finally been identified. So who was Carl Charles Webb? The answer, frustratingly, is that we still don't know as much as we'd like. Here's what we've pieced together. Carl Webb was born in 1905 in Footscray, Victoria, a working-class suburb of Melbourne. He was the youngest of 6 children. His father, Richard Webb, was a German immigrant. His mother, Eliza, was Australian-born. Webb grew up during World War I and came of age during the 1920s. He trained as an electrical engineer and instrument maker, skilled, technical work that required precision and intelligence. In 1941, at age 35, he married Dorothy Jean Robertson, who was 21. The marriage certificate lists her occupation as foot specialist, what we'd now call a podiatrist or chiropodist. We don't know much about their marriage, but court documents from Dorothy's 1951 divorce petition provide some clues. Dorothy claimed Webb was a quiet man who went to bed at 7 p.m. every night. But he could also be unpleasant, sullen, and rude to her or anyone else if he lost at cards. This paints a picture of a man who was introverted, perhaps depressed, with a temper that emerged when things didn't go his way. In April 1947, Webb left Dorothy. The circumstances aren't clear. Did he walk out? Did she kick him out? We don't know. From April 1947 to December 1948, the 20 months between leaving his wife and being found dead on Somerton Beach, Carl Webb essentially disappeared from the historical record. No employment records, no addresses, no official documents. He was living off the grid. Some of Webb's family history provides context for his state of mind during this period. Between 1939 and 1946, just before he left Dorothy, Webb lost 4 close relatives in 7 years. His father died in 1939. His mother died in 1946. His brother Roy Webb was captured by the Japanese during World War II and died as a prisoner of war in Malaya. Other family members also passed during this period. Abbott and Fitzpatrick believe Webb suffered from serious mental health issues and spiraled down after these losses. So by the time Webb left his wife in 1947, he was likely depressed, grieving, and possibly suffering from what we'd now recognize as post-traumatic stress or complicated grief. Now, here's where some of the earlier mysteries start to make sense. The T. Keene, or Keene, labels in the suitcase. Webb had a sister named Frida who was married to a man named Thomas Keene. It's likely that Webb received hand-me-down clothing from his brother-in-law, which would explain why items in the Somerton Man's possession had Keene written on them. This might also explain why some of the clothing appeared to be American-made. Thomas Keene had connections to the United States. He had coins and a Chicago map among his possessions, possibly from aircrew training during the war. If Keene had acquired American clothing and passed it along to Webb, that would explain the American items in the Somerton Man's wardrobe. Why Webb came to Adelaide. Dorothy Webb, Carl's estranged wife, had moved to Butte, South Australia, by 1951. It's possible, even likely, that she moved there earlier, perhaps in 1948. Butte is only 89 miles from Adelaide. Abbott believes Webb may have been trying to find Dorothy. Perhaps he wanted to reconcile. Perhaps he wanted to finalize the divorce. Perhaps he just wanted to see her one more time. He may have come to Adelaide hoping to find her, only to discover she had moved on with her life. The Rubaiyat and Tamám Shud. Carl Webb, according to what little we know about him, enjoyed writing poetry. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam is a book about mortality, the fleeting nature of life, and accepting one's fate. The final lines of the Rubaiyat, just before Tamám Shud, read, "The moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it." These are words about fate. About how once something is done, it cannot be undone. About how life moves forward regardless of our regrets. For a man who had lost his family, his marriage, and perhaps his sense of purpose, these words would have resonated deeply. The Tamám Shud note in his pocket seems less like a spy signal and more like a personal statement. It is finished. It is ended. The code. This remains the biggest unsolved mystery. What do those 5 lines of letters mean? MRGOABABDMTBIMPANETPMLIABOAIQCITTMTSAMSTGAB. Derek Abbott believes it might be an acrostic, the first letters of words from a poem or passage that had personal meaning to Webb. Or it could be the initials of someone's name. Or it could be notes for something entirely unrelated to his death. Without more context about Webb's life, his interests, his relationships, his state of mind, we may never know. How did he die? This is the final mystery. The autopsy suggested heart failure, possibly induced by poison. But no specific poison was ever identified. Was it suicide? Did Webb take poison deliberately, choose a beautiful beach, lie down against a wall, and let death take him? Or was it accidental? Some have suggested he may have been taking medication for a health condition and accidentally overdosed. Or could it have been murder? It seems unlikely, but we can't rule it out entirely. The truth is, we don't know. And we may never know. Carl Charles Webb came to Somerton Beach on November 30, 1948. By the evening of December 1, he was dead. and the exact circumstances of his death remain a mystery. And so, after 74 years, the Somerton Man has a name: Carl Charles Webb. But even with this breakthrough, so many questions remain unanswered. Why did he remove all the labels from his clothing? Was he trying to hide his identity, or did he simply not want Dorothy to be burdened with his death? What did the code mean? Was it a message? A poem? Random thoughts? How did he die? Suicide? Accident? Murder? And what about Jessica Thompson, the nurse with the phone number in the book? Was she really uninvolved, as she claimed? Or did she know Carl Webb in some way we'll never discover? These mysteries may never be solved. But there's something poetic about that, isn't there? Carl Webb died with secrets. And even in death, some of those secrets remain his alone. As you drift off to sleep tonight, think about this. History is full of mysteries. Some get solved, some don't, and sometimes, even when we think we've found the answer, there are layers beneath that we can never quite reach. Carl Webb walked onto Somerton Beach in 1948. He lay down, and he died. For 74 years, he had no name. Now he does, and maybe that's enough. Good night. Story 2. Tonight's story takes us deep into the quiet, snow-lined mountains of New Hampshire, where the disappearance of Maura Murray has lingered for over 2 decades, an adult woman whose case has become one of the most discussed mysteries on the internet. What makes it so gripping is not just the unanswered questions, but the atmosphere around it. An ordinary night, an empty road, and a moment where a life seemed to slip through the seams of reality. Before we step into the timeline, picture the setting. It's February. The air in the White Mountains is sharp and still, the kind that bites gently at your face but also makes every sound crisper, clearer. Houses sit far apart, tucked behind trees that look almost skeletal in winter. It's the sort of place where nights feel deeper, and time moves slower, like the world is catching its breath. Maura Murray was a 21-year-old nursing student, bright, athletic, and deeply loved by her family. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she had been dealing with a few personal stresses, nothing unusual for someone juggling school, work, and relationships, but enough to make her seem a little overwhelmed. Still, she kept going. That's what everyone remembers. Maura pushed through things quietly, like she didn't want to burden anyone else. On February 9, 2004, Maura emailed her professors, saying there had been a family emergency and she would be gone for a week. No actual emergency existed. She packed up her car, including clothes, toiletries, textbooks, and some food, and began driving north. Alone. To this day, no one knows exactly why. The drive from Massachusetts into New Hampshire is peaceful, especially in winter. As the road curves deeper into rural areas, cell service becomes patchy, houses fewer, and the trees grow thicker around the 2-lane highways. It's not a place you pass through unless you intend to. Around 7 p.m., under a sky already dark, Maura's black Saturn slid off the road and hit a snowbank on Route 112 near the town of Haverhill. A nearby resident heard the noise and looked out the window, seeing a car with minor front-end damage. Within minutes, another neighbor, a school bus driver, pulled up beside the vehicle. He offered help. Maura declined, assuring him she had already called roadside assistance, even though phone records showed she hadn't. That moment is where the timeline begins to feel strange, like pages missing from a book. When police arrived minutes later, Maura was gone. No footprints leading into the woods, no signs of a struggle, no trail at all. Just an empty road, an abandoned car, and a silence that felt far too heavy for such a small place. In a matter of minutes, a straightforward car mishap had become one of America's most enduring mysteries. By the time police reached Route 112, only about 7 to 10 minutes had passed since the bus driver last saw Maura. In a normal case, that wouldn't be enough time for someone to completely disappear. But on this quiet stretch of road, surrounded by woods, marsh, and long gaps between houses, even a short window of time can feel like an opening into uncertainty. When the officer pulled up, the car's hazard lights were off. The driver's door was locked. Inside, the airbags had deployed, and Maura's belongings were still there: clothes, textbooks, even a box of wine that had spilled slightly onto the interior. What was missing was Maura herself, leaving investigators puzzled from the start. If she'd been injured, she likely wouldn't have gotten far. If she'd stepped into the woods, her footprints should have been visible in the snow. But the ground around the car was strangely undisturbed. The officer scanned the edges of the road, shining his flashlight into the tree line. The forest loomed dark and close, but nothing moved, not even the quiet crackle of shifting branches in the cold. Houses nearby were spaced out, with long driveways and dim porch lights glowing faintly through the trees. It was the kind of place where you could hear a car engine from far away, but footsteps disappeared into the winter silence. Within an hour, backup arrived. The car was towed. The scene was photographed. Calls were made to local hospitals and nearby residents. But every direction led to nothing. No one had seen a young woman walking. No one had heard a shout or a struggle. No one reported a knock at their door. What made everything more confusing was the neatness of the scene. Nothing looked frantic. Nothing felt rushed. The airbags deployed, yes, but there were no signs of someone running blindly into the night. No dropped items. No torn clothing. No footprints across the icy banks. It was as if a moment between Maura's last conversation and the officer's arrival had been sealed off, leaving only speculation to fill the space. As the night stretched on, temperatures dropped. Search teams returned with thermal cameras and tracking dogs, hoping the cold air would help pinpoint heat signatures or scent trails. But the dogs lost the trail quickly. Some reports say they followed a faint scent west along the road for a short distance before it suddenly stopped. As if Maura had stepped off the path and into nothing. This abrupt end to the trail is one of the most debated moments in the case. Some believe it suggests she left in another vehicle. Others think she might have hidden or collapsed somewhere out of view. And some simply feel that the environment itself, dark, thick, and unforgiving, swallowed any trace before searchers could find it. By early morning, the search was paused. The sky began to lighten, and the quiet of the mountains returned. But something was different now. A car had been found. A young woman had not. And the question on everyone's mind, where did she go, had no answer waiting on the other side. As dawn broke over the white mountains, the quiet roads that had seemed so peaceful the night before now felt charged with tension. Law enforcement began piecing together the timeline, retracing Maura's steps, and talking to anyone who might have seen her that evening. Her disappearance was no longer just a simple case of a car accident, it was a puzzle that seemed to grow more complicated with every passing hour. The first step was the crash site itself. Police examined the Saturn meticulously, the deployed airbags, the minor front-end damage, and the items left inside. Every detail mattered. Textbooks, personal effects, and even a box of wine gave the impression that Maura hadn't been panicked, at least not at the moment of departure from the car. Investigators wondered, did she intend to leave the vehicle temporarily and return, or did something compel her to leave the road entirely? The answers were not immediately clear. Next, authorities focused on Maura's recent communications. Her professors had received emails claiming a family emergency. In reality, no such emergency existed. Her friends and family described her as a thoughtful, responsible young woman, unlikely to vanish without reason. Yet, the emails hinted at premeditation, raising questions about whether she had planned to leave for a short while, or something had intervened unexpectedly. Each call, text, and email became a thread in a web that investigators were only beginning to untangle. Search teams were organized, combing forests, fields, and the riverbanks near the accident site. Volunteers and law enforcement walked mile after mile of trail, their flashlights cutting through the morning mist. Snow made tracking difficult. Every footprint was scrutinized, every disturbance examined. But the trails remained frustratingly incomplete. The tracks that did appear were inconsistent, sometimes leading to nowhere. It was as if Maura had vanished into thin air, leaving only the faintest hints behind. As hours turned into days, the investigation expanded. Police interviewed nearby residents, hikers, and drivers who might have passed through the area during the critical window of disappearance. Each story added new layers of theory. Some believed she might have accepted help from a stranger. Others considered the possibility that she sought shelter somewhere and intended to return to her car. Every theory had merit and uncertainty woven together, making it difficult to separate fact from speculation. Media coverage began to grow, though the reporting was careful to respect the privacy of Maura's family. National outlets highlighted the unusual circumstances, focusing on the mysterious nature of the disappearance rather than sensationalizing it. True crime communities online, meanwhile, dissected each known detail, debating timelines, possible motives, and environmental factors. While theories ranged widely, the one constant was the puzzling, almost eerie emptiness left at the site of the accident. By the end of the first week, the case had become a study in patience and observation. Every small clue, every overlooked detail, became crucial. Investigators had no definitive answers, but each careful step, each methodical search, and each interview slowly mapped the terrain of uncertainty that surrounded Maura's disappearance. And as the days stretched on, one question remained central, haunting everyone involved. How could a young woman vanish so completely on an ordinary winter night? As the search stretched into its second week, the White Mountains seemed to hold their breath. Trees stood motionless in the winter air, snow lay in thick blankets, and every small noise, an animal scurrying, a distant car engine, echoed with significance. Investigators and volunteers alike began to confront the perplexing reality. The environment itself was both a witness and a challenge. The dense forests, frozen rivers, and winding roads made it difficult to determine what might have happened once Maura left her car. Multiple theories circulated, each trying to explain the vanishing act. One considered the possibility of voluntary disappearance. Maura had carefully packed her belongings, written her emails, and driven north with intention. Perhaps, some speculated, she wanted to escape for a time, to experience solitude in the quiet mountains. Yet her family insisted this was out of character. She had responsibilities, friends, and a life that she loved. The gap between intention and action, if any, remained unbridgeable. Other theories considered the role of the environment. Winter conditions can quickly erase footprints and obscure trails. A gentle slope or hidden embankment might have diverted her path. Snow-covered underbrush could hide evidence, making the forest appear empty when, in fact, it held subtle traces. Search dogs sometimes lost her scent almost immediately, suggesting that natural factors could have played a major role in the disappearance. The forest, in its calm neutrality, seemed both protective and impenetrable. Some speculated about interaction with strangers, a passerby offering assistance or encountering Maura unknowingly. The stretch of Route 112 she had been driving was not densely populated, yet drivers and hikers occasionally passed by. A simple encounter could explain why she left her vehicle. But no witnesses confirmed any contact. Every lead ended with possibilities, not proof, and the mystery deepened with each passing day. Investigators also revisited the timeline, questioning how quickly events could have unfolded. From the moment the car struck the snowbank to the arrival of the officer, only minutes had passed. In that brief window, how could she have traveled into the woods or elsewhere undetected? The precision of time made the disappearance feel almost supernatural, as though the minutes themselves had slipped away unnoticed. People listening to the story often imagine the quiet roads, the snow muffling sound, and the feeling that the world itself had paused to conceal the truth. Online communities and amateur sleuths dissected every detail. Old maps, satellite imagery, and weather records were combed for clues. Each piece of information fed speculation, while official statements remained measured and careful. Law enforcement emphasized patience, methodical observation, and respect for the forest and its challenges. The winter woods, after all, were not a controlled environment, they were unpredictable, indifferent, and vast. Despite the theories, the forest remained silent. Every step taken, every snow-dusted branch bent under weight, seemed to whisper uncertainty. Each unanswered question, each minor inconsistency in the timeline, only added to the quiet tension. For those following the story, whether investigators, family, or listeners, it became a meditation on the fragility of presence, the power of place, and the way ordinary moments can turn extraordinary when circumstances conspire. As the days turned into weeks, Maura Murray's disappearance began to ripple far beyond the snowy roads of New Hampshire. Her family, friends, and local community faced a slow, persistent uncertainty that never fully lifted. Parents worried for their own children. Students at her college discussed the strange and haunting case in hushed tones. Even those who had never met Maura felt the quiet tension of a mystery that refused to resolve itself. Media coverage amplified the mystery, though it remained careful to avoid sensationalizing the event. News outlets reported the facts. A young woman missing in the mountains, an abandoned vehicle, a search that stretched on without answers. Local television stations broadcast the efforts of police and volunteers, showing teams combing through the woods and documenting the tracks they found, or didn't find. Online, communities debated every detail, shared theories, and compared notes, sometimes adding pressure to investigators, sometimes keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. For Mora's family, every news segment, every new tip, was a mix of hope and dread. They watched as strangers analyzed every photo, every email, every decision, sometimes offering support, sometimes speculation. The emotional landscape became a balancing act, holding on to hope while acknowledging the growing possibility that answers might never come. Yet even amidst uncertainty, they found solace in the small gestures: friends driving to the crash site to leave flowers, neighbors volunteering in search parties, letters from strangers expressing sympathy and concern. Investigators, meanwhile, continued their methodical approach. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, every witness statement reviewed multiple times. They revisited the road, checked nearby houses, and analyzed weather and snow conditions in detail. Months later, some clues remained as faint as the footprints in the snow. Tire tracks that disappeared, slight disturbances in the tree line, and timing inconsistencies that sparked questions but no definitive answers. Each lead was a thread they followed cautiously, aware that the forest and winter conditions could hide as much as they revealed. Public fascination with the case endured because of its quiet, almost surreal nature. A car stopped on a snowy road, a young woman gone in minutes, and a forest that swallowed traces of her presence. People were drawn not only to the unknown, but to the sense of ordinary life interrupted. The case became a reminder that even in familiar settings, college campuses, local roads, and community streets, extraordinary uncertainty can occur, quietly and without warning. The narrative of Maura Murray's disappearance continues to evolve, though no definitive answers have been found. New theories emerge, old leads are revisited, and the forest retains its calm neutrality. For those listening to this story in the quiet hours of night, it serves as both a meditation and a gentle caution that ordinary moments can shift unexpectedly, that mysteries can remain unsolved, and that even amidst careful investigation, some questions linger indefinitely. And as the snowfall settles on the mountains, as the roads remain quiet and empty, the story of Maura Murray lingers too, softly, persistently, like a whisper that refuses to fade. A case that began on an ordinary winter night continues to remind everyone that not all endings are certain, and that some stories, no matter how carefully observed, exist in the quiet tension between what is known and what remains a mystery. As the search for Maura Murray continued in the weeks and months after her disappearance, the story began to take on a life of its own online. True crime enthusiasts, amateur investigators, and curious listeners from around the world discovered the case, poring over every detail, image, and timeline. Social media and online forums became digital search parties, piecing together fragments of a night that had left only questions behind. The digital attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, tips poured in, sometimes leading to minor breakthroughs, such as locating witnesses who had not yet spoken to police or identifying overlooked details about the route she traveled. On the other hand, speculation sometimes blurred the line between fact and conjecture, creating a virtual labyrinth where truth and theory intertwined. Every photograph of the snowy road, every email excerpt, every item in the abandoned car was analyzed multiple times, scrutinized from every angle, and discussed endlessly. Theories multiplied. Some suggested that Maura had intended to leave quietly, creating a brief disappearance to escape pressures she had been facing. Others considered the possibility of an encounter along the road, whether accidental or deliberate. Some proposed environmental factors, slippery terrain, unseen paths, and the rapid covering of tracks by snow and wind, that could explain the absence of footprints and other clues. Each theory held its own logic and uncertainty, feeding the endless discussions that kept the case alive online. Despite the speculation, one thing remained consistent: the case was defined by silence and absence. There were no definitive answers, no clear trail to follow, and no single moment that could explain everything that had happened in those fleeting minutes. The forest retained its calm indifference, the roads remained empty and quiet, and the mountains kept their secrets, even as the world outside continued to analyze and debate. For Maura's family, the online attention was both comforting and challenging. While it brought awareness and kept the hope of answers alive, it also exposed them to endless theories and questions, some kind-hearted, some intrusive. They navigated these waters carefully, choosing to focus on support from friends, neighbors, and those directly involved in the official investigation. The balance between public curiosity and personal grief was delicate, requiring patience, understanding, and sometimes quiet retreat. For those following the story from afar, the mystery offered a different kind of engagement, a chance to meditate on uncertainty, to reflect on human behavior, and to consider the fragility of ordinary life. Listeners in the quiet of night could imagine the snowy roads, the silent forest, and the small, fleeting moments that had become the heart of the case. The story did not need violence or spectacle to capture attention. Its power lay in its calm, unresolvable tension, and the gentle reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved. Even now, years later, the disappearance of Maura Murray continues to inspire discussion, analysis, and reflection. The online community, the investigators, and her family all contribute to a story that exists in the space between certainty and unknown, a story that whispers softly of absence, curiosity, and the quiet persistence of unanswered questions. For those who listen carefully, the tale becomes not just about a single young woman, but about the way life's ordinary moments can unexpectedly unfold into the extraordinary, leaving traces that are felt more than they are seen. Years have passed since the snowy night that Maura Murray disappeared, yet the story remains vivid, not because of sensational headlines or dramatic speculation, but because of the quiet echoes it left behind. Every winter, the roads that wind through the White Mountains seem the same, peaceful and still, yet for those who know the story, there is an underlying tension, a sense that the ordinary can shift in an instant, leaving uncertainty in its wake. For her family, life has continued in its own way, marked by the absence that cannot be filled. Holidays, milestones, and ordinary daily routines carry subtle reminders of her missing presence. Friends speak of her in memories, of laughter shared, of moments when her energy and care touched those around her. In every conversation, every recollection, there is both warmth and a trace of sadness, a recognition of what was lost and what remains a mystery. The story of Maura Murray has also influenced the broader community, encouraging reflection on safety, awareness, and the small choices we make each day. Roads, even familiar ones, can hold unexpected dangers. Solitude, while comforting, can introduce risk in certain environments. And the importance of clear communication, both to friends and family, resonates through discussions of the case. Each listener, each reader, is reminded of the fragility of ordinary life and the impact of moments that, at first, seem insignificant. The online true crime community continues to engage with her story, exploring timelines, maps, and the subtle details of the night she disappeared. While speculation varies, the focus remains on understanding, rather than judgment. It is a collective meditation on mystery itself. The way life's ordinary events can sometimes transform into unresolved questions, how the environment interacts with human behavior, and how the mind searches for patterns in absence. There is a lesson in the calm persistence of the case. Some stories do not offer closure. Some mysteries remain unsolved, not because investigators failed, but because life can be unpredictable, and the environment indifferent. And yet, even without answers, these stories shape awareness, foster empathy, and create connections among those who seek to understand. Maura Murray's disappearance is a quiet reminder that vigilance, care, and attention matter, and that the human desire to find meaning can coexist with uncertainty. For those listening in the quiet hours, the story is almost meditative. The snow-covered roads, the silent forests, the empty car, these images evoke reflection rather than fear. The narrative is gentle, measured, and deliberate, allowing space for thought, for calm, and for consideration of the delicate balance between ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance. Ultimately, the tale of Maura Murray lingers not as a dramatic headline, but as a quiet reflection on mystery, absence, and memory. It teaches that life can change in the blink of an eye, that some questions may remain unanswered, and that even in silence, stories continue to be told. And as the mountains rest under blankets of snow, the quiet persists, reminding us that some mysteries are not solved, but they are not forgotten. The night Murray disappeared was unusually quiet in the small town. Neighbors later reported a sense of unease, though at the time, no one could have predicted the tragedy that would unfold. Murray had been home alone, as his parents were attending a distant family gathering. Friends said he had seemed slightly distracted earlier in the evening, scrolling through his phone with a frown that didn't quite match the lighthearted texts he was sending. At around 10:30 p.m., a neighbor saw the glow of Murray's bedroom light flicker through the curtains, a subtle sign that he was still awake. Moments later, strange sounds, described as muffled thuds, were reported by another neighbor, though it was never clear what they were. Some dismissed it as the usual creaks of an old house, others later speculated it might have been a struggle. By 11 p.m., Murray's room was dark, and the house seemed to fall into silence. The next morning, when his parents returned, they found his bedroom door ajar. Murray was nowhere to be seen. At first, panic mixed with confusion. They called his name, checked the backyard, the nearby woods, and even his favorite local hangouts. Nothing. His backpack and personal items were untouched, his bed neatly made, as if he had planned to return within minutes. The house showed no signs of forced entry, which only deepened the mystery. Authorities arrived quickly after the parents' frantic call. The first responders were met with a haunting scene, everything in order, yet Murray was gone. His room was meticulously arranged, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. They immediately began tracing his last known digital footprints, reviewing social media interactions, texts, and GPS data. While most messages seemed innocent, one stood out, a cryptic text sent to a friend at 10:15 p.m. "I think someone's outside." This single message became a central clue in the investigation. Who was outside, and why? Neighbors reported seeing a shadow near the property line later that night, but the witness was unsure, describing it as too quick to tell if it was a person or an animal. Every lead, however, seemed to vanish into thin air. Even now, years later, that night remains the focal point of Murray's disappearance. Was it a planned abduction? A random encounter with a stranger? Or something more sinister, closer to home than anyone realized? The unanswered questions have haunted the family, the investigators, and the town alike, creating an uneasy silence that lingers over the community. Once the authorities realized Murray had vanished without a trace, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives arrived at the house, meticulously documenting every inch of the property, taking photographs of the living room, bedroom, and backyard. Surprisingly, there were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken windows, no footprints leading away from the house. It was as if Murray had simply disappeared into thin air. The first step was to trace his digital life. Murray's phone became a treasure trove of potential clues. Investigators examined his call logs, texts, and social media interactions. Most messages were mundane, the usual mix of jokes and planning for the weekend. But that cryptic text to a friend, "I think someone's outside," sent at 10:15 p.m., immediately raised red flags. Attempts to trace the sender or determine the location of the message were frustratingly inconclusive. The digital trail seemed to vanish right when it mattered most. Next, detectives canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to neighbors who might have seen or heard something unusual. One elderly couple recalled hearing soft footsteps around midnight, but when they looked outside, the street was empty. Another neighbor mentioned a dark vehicle parked near the edge of the woods behind Murray's house earlier that evening, but by the time authorities checked, it had disappeared. Small pieces of a larger puzzle, none of which fit together neatly. The team also considered possible motives. Was this a case of abduction by a stranger? Murray had no known enemies, no history of conflicts, and was a quiet, well-liked teenager. Could it have been someone he knew? Someone he trusted? Investigators began looking into friends, classmates, and acquaintances, conducting interviews that revealed nothing unusual, no threats, no strange behavior, nothing to suggest anyone close to him had harmed him. Search parties were organized in the surrounding woods and nearby rivers. Trained dogs scoured the area, helicopters flew overhead, and volunteers combed every possible hiding spot. Weeks passed, but no sign of Murray was found. Each passing day only deepened the mystery. The community was gripped by fear and speculation. Posters appeared on streetlights and telephone poles, and social media exploded with theories, some plausible, others wildly imaginative. Forensics became another critical focus. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, analyzed soil samples, and even checked for traces of DNA in the surrounding areas. Despite the thoroughness, no evidence emerged to indicate a struggle, nor anything pointing to where Murray might have gone. Every clue seemed to lead to a dead end. As days turned into weeks, the case shifted from an active search to a perplexing mystery. Murray's disappearance became more than just a missing person case, it became a puzzle that haunted everyone involved. Every unanswered question, every shadowy lead, only added to the sense of dread. How could someone vanish so completely, leaving behind no trace, no evidence, no explanation? Murray's disappearance is a haunting reminder of how fragile life can be, and how quickly the familiar can turn into a mystery. It's easy to feel powerless when someone vanishes without a trace, leaving only questions and echoes of the life they once lived. Yet, in reflecting on cases like Murray's, we are reminded of the importance of awareness, community vigilance, and compassion. Every small act, checking in on a neighbor, noticing the unusual, staying connected, can make a difference in preventing tragedy. While the case remains unsolved, Murray's story continues to live on in the memories of those who knew him, and in the lessons his disappearance imparts. For families facing uncertainty, the pain of not knowing can be overwhelming. And for the rest of us, it is a call to remain alert, empathetic, and present in the lives of those around us. If you found this story gripping, there are more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to stay updated on cases like Murray's, hit the like button if you appreciate detailed storytelling, and share this video with someone who loves true crime. Every view helps keep the conversation, and hope, alive.